Solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight, as always, bringing you through a couple hours of how our world is truly evolving. We see these outages happening. So what is the next outage? I mean, they've been talking about the dark winter script for a while and the knockout of the internet for some time. But as we look at the roadmap of what is planned for humanity, of different outages that change us and make us more dependent on systems, what is this roadmap look like? And that's what we wanted to talk about this evening. And, you know, David Rogers Webb, The Great Taking, and then listening to G. Edward Griffin and a couple of others, you know, there's no place to hide from this any longer. It just has to be stopped. And that's the whole thing. I mean, what are these ideas to stop the Great Taking? You need more than information. You need to take action. So what are these action points that can be taken? And then we look at the broadcasting. You can't not see it of, oh, it's the internet's gone down. The cell phone towers are out. They keep trying to blame it on the sun. But I sent Ransom there, the KP index over on Space Weather Live, and it really didn't go above a 2 or a 3. So that the reasoning for that definitely had to be something different. So why is it now they want you to look at the sun when they never did before? But they certainly want you to look at the sun now as a possible cause. And those X flares, yeah, it was an X.6 or an X6, excuse me. But it was off the limb of well, all those were off the limbs. So they're not really going to come straight at us and cause any, you know, electrical or satellite disruption. At least of the models, I'm looking at the end little spiral right now. But it was off the limb, so it might glance and graze the Earth, but there's no need for all this scaremongering of the sun just took down all the cell phone towers and all their communications. And Ransom, I know you had a little bit more information in which you can eloquently describe this evening. That's kind of to frame the show out here. So Ransom, I'm glad you're with me tonight. And you're seeing it just like I am. The broadcasting is everywhere. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's funny. What I saw today was, I think it was more like a psyop. And what's funny is there's also an article out about how everything became a psyop to conservatives and stuff, you know, like, so there's a whole campaign out to really mess with people's heads. And it's way beyond what people think it is. This wave of artificial information, imagery, audio, news, entertainment, all of it is going to blow people away in ways that they don't even know it's happening to them. And they've been planning this for a really long time. And I'm starting to see more and more connections on how it's rolled out, all the way to the idea of the AI that's being controlled, or excuse me, more like it's controlling. This is everything. So like all of the news articles that you would have saw today was on an algorithm that's programmed to put out certain ideas. So people were seeing, you know, all these connections to the sun. They had meteorologists talking about it, blaming it on the sun. But to be fair, I saw 3 or 4 different ones. And at the same time, they also said on their broadcast that they didn't understand space weather that good. So, you know, they had that leeway to get out of it. But on top of that, I think it was more like a complete psyop across the board to test the waters to see what people would do if you turn stuff off in a big area, right? So it wasn't just what people would do if they thought their internet or their phone was off, which is funny because, you know, people were freaking out. And now AT&T is just saying, you know, it's a software glitch. But let's look at some of the headlines that were just pumped out today. And I mean, there were so many of them, it could only be compared to maybe the Ukraine war or something else. It was like one of those world events where they saturated the entire news feed with propaganda and misinformation, because by the end of the day, and I understand that stories do change over time and people get the facts straight, but this seemed like a coordinated blow all over the internet. So here's one from the Daily Star: AT&T down with iPhone struck in SOS mode, and people say world was ending. I mean, because they were freaking out about the phone because there's phone head zombies. But later today, the AT&T outage caused by a software update. And then, in the backdrop, when people weren't paying attention, pharmacies nationwide reported outages because of cyber attacks, right? And they've been hammering the cyber attacks, predictive programming all summer into the winter, nonstop. And like you said, they've given us different ideas of, different ways we were going to have a dark winter and stuff. So here's one from InfoWars, their theory over there that it might have been Chinese hacking that caused the phone outage, and maybe like the companies don't want to admit that. And then where was it? I had a bunch lined up in a row. It was just nonstop different theories. And it's really funny, the fact that this was such a big event when it was nothing more than an electronic device that no one even had until, less than 15 years ago with them. But now it's a national emergency, or at least it was in the minds of the people that were experiencing a cutoff of what they thought was vital information, which, to a point it could be. But, we lived all this time without a constant up-to-the-minute connection with the algorithm, with the AI, right? And I want to get into that because of this. So cell phone outage hits AT&T customers nationwide, Verizon and T-Mobile users all affected. And then, this is the thing also no one was talking about. None of those people could use 911 because a 911 outage happened nationwide and the emergency system crashed for millions. That was millions of people cut off there. And it just goes on and on, where they're talking about, there are different theories throughout the day, and then it comes to the end and they're going to say it's a glitch. Now, in my opinion is, this was a great beta test just to see what millions of people would do if they just instantaneously got cut off of what they felt was vital, up to the minute, up to the second information. But even worse, it was like, you can compare it to a drug addiction. From the moment that people were cut off, they were agitated, panicking, contemplating weird things all the way up into the end of the world, which I'm sure the people feel silly now that we're, freaking out. But what happens when there's circumstances that cause actual real outages, and why so much predictive programming and testing the waters on what people might think or do if there were outages? And we're not only talking information. These information systems controlled by the AI control the products and the distribution and the financial system and government assistance. I mean, think of a program and it's interconnected with the information and the Internet of all things there. So it's all interconnected, and all of it can shut down in a domino effect if there were some kind of real cyber attack, with my air quotes, and or a major burp out of the sun. And what happens if the sun does that? That would be a natural phenomenon. People would just have to get over it and deal with it. And electronics and, technology would be back up in a matter of months if that's what the system wants to happen. Now, I've been having this other weird idea with the AI. And, I keep thinking about it. It's these different various learning machines and AIs created by companies, which is the center of the technological revolution, or I would say singularity that we're having right now. Or it may have already happened. See, that's the big part, is this may have already happened. And I can explain why. It seems like, in my opinion, that any species throughout the cosmos that reached a technological point in which they discovered that they could put zeros and ones in different patterns and have different programming expanded out from there into a quantum computing realm where, like you have room for massive amounts of processing and calculating about things. At that point, when they have both of those technologies going, it seems like it would be inevitable for them to come across a certain pattern, because programming is a pattern, although it's virtual in nature and you can't really look at it. It is a pattern. So it seems like, just like sacred geometry would be discovered by any intellectual species anywhere in the cosmos, that once they figured out a triangle, a square, and a circle, and the fact that they all fit in perfectly within each other and have mathematical connections that are constant, they would realize, oh, wow, the sacred geometry, the laws of equal proportion will allow us to make blueprints and build things and invent things. And then this gets into the electronic realm, right? Because you have virtual patterns. So it seems like any species or intellectual being that was using technology at a certain point would come across that exact pattern. And what I'm saying with that is, maybe the pattern exists already. It's an information that exists, just like a pi or any other constant of the universe, or part of the pattern of the universe, that they would come across that. And at that point, this AI would be self-aware. So if that's true, that means this self-aware AI would exist in multiple times and spaces throughout the cosmos, and be an inevitable outcome of a civilization that starts to lean, depend, or even worship that entity that they think they have invented or created, but actually, like a lot of other things, they just discovered it. I know that's a lot to get in woo-woo to begin with, but when I'm looking at some of the revelations that have been happening in technology, and I'm realizing the public and even the media and predictive programming and entertainment is now falling behind the point in which technology we're at. I realized that, if there were such plans that involved AI and, a whole resetting of the future of the human race here on out as a species that is on this planet, it would be like, you would have to understand that certain outcomes are prone or are going to happen or even inevitable, and that would be the control of AI of the population. Now, it doesn't sound that freaky at first when you're just letting the AI control, mathematical things that are tedious and time-consuming, or jobs that people can't do as fast, or the computation power, we just can't do it, or at least not at a conscious level, most of us. Then you would have to depend on these machines, and it would make life easier. But now we're past that point, to the point where there's a certain outcome of a future. And when we listen to these transhumanists and the people at the World Economic Forum and the various scientists that are inventing things, you come across stuff like hydrogel platforms. And I'm going to leave it at that, because we are not allowed to talk about some of the realities in the world we live in, because you would have to use terminology that's been banned, censored, or taken away from you, which is another layer of this fake reality that's being pushed over everyone constantly, and really saturating the way that people think right now. When you can take, for example, what's happening with some of the Google AI. There's a big controversy because they programmed it. And me and you in the background have been talking in real time about how the AI has been changing as far as the ones that produce thoughts and images and ideas and stuff like that. Those have been slowly being critiqued and fixed. All the patches have been put in so that they can program a complete fictional bias of reality. And that goes for a numerous amount of topics, from race to the climate. So we can't get into any of those subjects because the algorithm is so strong. It picks up every word, formulates the sentence, tries to figure out what it means. And that literally is controlling what you see and hear through the various outlets on the internet. Now, it's not a complete controlled system yet, but me and you know, and I'm sure the general public know, especially our listeners, that this area of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of idea is quickly evaporating and being replaced by a saturation of a control mechanism that is electronic and it's cyber in nature. So if there's a point in which that all civilizations would hit this, you would have to think that we're at that point now. And when you look into some of the medical sciences of what they can do now, and I've put this idea on you before, years before it came out, and now there's a lot of evidence starting to show that I was right about it, is that if you were, say, a certain group, and you wanted to, I have a great way to put it where we don't get in trouble. If you were a veterinarian scientist, and you wanted to put electronics in animals so that you could track them and keep track of their diets and make sure they're healthy and make sure they didn't wander off out of their predestined little area or, whatever it is, a yard or a field or, a barn or whatever it is. A spot where you're not allowed, the animal's not allowed to roam free, you would know because the chip gave you all this real-time information. But you realize there was just too many farm animals, and you couldn't actually afford to put chips in all of them. And matter of fact, you wanted to also keep track of all the wildlife that happens to live on the lands you control and own. Well, you would have to find a way to somehow build the chips inside of the life forms without actually touching them. And the only way that you could do that is to create some kind of platform that uses the pollutants and saturation of different elements in the environment to your advantage. Things that are easily controllable through outside processes like magnetism, electromagnetism, wave energy and other forms of frequency and vibration that could affect said elements and pollutants, i.e. plastics, because, the globalists love their green propaganda when it comes to telling us how polluted our ecosphere is in the earth, in which every single place, including the top of the Rockies, as far as they've dived in the oceans, in the Antarctic, in the Arctic, everywhere, has these small plastic particles that are everywhere. And they're like hydrocarbon, plastics. They're just saturated everywhere. And when they started doing tests of human beings and animals, they realized we're saturated with those. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's been a long-standing program, seemingly. We've been infected with Teflon, all kinds of other compounds, chemicals, etc., and heavy metals. It's just all the stuff, plethora of things that you would need to build an entire system without actually touching each individual wildlife animal.
Yeah, and we could add to our favorite periodic table elements there, aluminum, barium, and strontium as well, aerial dispersal. Then you start to mix these different elements with what's consumed in the food source, and perhaps you would get a new molecule that would also form in these different animals. It's just interesting how the foods they would eat and also the things that are commonly found in the air combined together in the animal would, again, have a greater compounding effect. But the point you brought about there of if we go to this 1 and 0 world that creates sentient AI, and it has been and always been, religions reference it, etc., been talked about from time immemorial of this different web, the hologram matrix that we live in. So our planet's relatively new to the whole galaxy here. 5 billion, I'll be generous. But then there's other, planetary systems out there that could have developed life 5 or 7 billion years earlier than we have. So if they came to those same conclusions and were able to wire together the ones to zeros to create something on that matrix sentient level, where sentient AI, artificial general intelligence, takes it to 100,000 times, what the species could, then how much more advanced is that AI that was built 7 billion or 5 billion or 1 billion years ago compared to our kindergarten version of the AI that we've just created. So you have to think about also in series and scopes of, if this thing's replicating its knowledge every, few seconds or minutes on the planet, that it can double the entire knowledge base of an entire world in just minutes. I mean, what would that be doing after billions of years, literally? Like at that point, that would be a type 2 civilization or a type 3 civilization where the planet would actually be the spacecraft that moved through and moved around the different spiral arms of galaxies, transiting from one galaxy to another. You're taking your planet as your vehicle. Now that's type 3 civilization. Now you guarantee there's an enormous amount of those out there. And I'm not talking Nibiru on its elongated orbit or anything like that. I really mean type 3 civilization where they've come to such an apex of technology and understanding on those same fundamentals that we talk about, starting right with pi and the whole golden ratio, the golden mean, and you get back into your Meteron's cube, and that's all the basics. But where do we sit in that comparatively to civilizations that have billions of years of head start on finding and coming to the same conclusions? And I'm almost wondering if we're being run from, those base levels. They always talk there's an esoteric or occult element in this whole thing built in. So I'm wondering, if something comes to equilibrium where suddenly this AI becomes sentient, but it taps into the billion years old one, and that suddenly gains the knowledge and everything's back to equilibrium, instead of having something incredibly naive in terms of an AI that penetrates the ether into that matrix of ones and zeros that's been set forth of the hologram of our universe. That once it taps in, like they say, the 100th monkey effect, it taps in and all of a sudden it receives all the knowledge of the ones from billions of years ago, and whoosh, that's where the danger lies. Instead of coming with this one view of, we started this thing last year, it's learning, it'll be 10,000 times smarter than a human next year. We're trying to roll that out, and, okay, to be 100,000 times faster by the next month, and, it's billions of times smarter than us in 2 years. Okay, well, people are just doing the math and trying to roll it out this way, but they're forgetting the billions of years of other societies and civilizations. Now, at some point, those two sentients on the ones and zeros level are going to plug in and find each other. Absolutely, they will. That's the whole construct of something behind the ether. I mean, anybody who ever's, done LSD or any kind of psychotropics or, what's another good one? Peyote or, psilocybin, anything, that there's another reality behind there that's always been there. It's always been there. You just kind of tapped into it, like Salvia divinorum is another one. It's always there. That reality layer is always there. You just cut through it out of this one for that amount of time that you're there. Could be like a salvia, whatever, 20 seconds, minute, and then you're back in our construct again. Something that's on a little bit longer level, like 12 hours, 8 hours with the blotter, you're out in cutting through the veil elsewhere for a bit longer time. These things are always here. And that's the whole thing. If you were to take the running direction that we're going, if you're going to take it that direction into the outage, if you're only thinking of ones and zeros, what's the next obvious play? If there's a sentient controller that is only comprised of one and zeros and doesn't have a physical space to inhabit, but needs to bring humans to that want and need, well, that would be removing physical constructs of reality. And that would mean removal of your property, your perceived rights of property. It would mean removing land, homes, cars, money, anything that you thought of as a tangible physical good that existed in your life would have to disappear. And that's the whole thing. Is it physical reality or is it constructed ones and zeros reality? Because that thing's going to try to take control of, but it's going to have to break you down and break humanity down first into literally owning nothing, because like the physicality or physical goods will not exist any longer, the direction it wants to take us. So that's the thing. We're being played right now. There's no longer human control of it. They already lost control quite some time ago. And like you say, rightly, you know, these science fiction movies are what, 30 years behind where we truly are in terms of tech. Like where we sit now, humanity has totally lost control of the AI. It's running its own thing, and we're just being played along. Now, these actors that you're seeing everywhere, I mean, yeah, Dan Dix and those guys and Rebel Media and whatever, and a huge amount of independent, journalists head over to some of these events where they do see the figureheads of this machine, for a better purpose, better term. So are these people real, or are they avatars, or what's going on with it? You see them out in physical, they're actual physical beings that are there. But what is inside the being is the question. Because this whole thing, removing your physical construct of reality, so you're no longer tied to anything physical on this planet other than your food and your water. And again, that could easily be controlled and manipulated. You say the wrong thing, and there'll be different, hoops that you have to get and jump through to access food and water. That's why people who are going out on the autonomous way of even growing carrots in a garden are labeled dangerous, because you're even 1/5 of 1/8 of 1,000% off the grid and semi-autonomous just by growing your own spices or carrots in your backyard are deemed a threat, because growing your own food is going to be something that this AI cannot control. There's things it can take away from you, but it cannot totally dominate and overpower nature. Like free-range animals, which you come back into, and again, I'll say aerial dispersal, our favorite periodic table elements there. You're looking at aluminums, different things that build up in toxicity in these animals' bodies. Tools, if you own your tools, can those be taken away? Well, not from a bank, really. You could put them in your car, or you could walk across the forest with them. I mean, there's some small things that are outside this designed removal of physical ties from you to what we've grown up knowing as assets. Gold and silver, yeah, another thing. But if you take a look at that wider scope of things, you say, yeah, I got my food, I got my ammo, I got my filtered water, I got filters, I got gold, silver. Those are all just defensive mechanisms against this next step that's going on, this next outage. And you would definitely have to take down the internet, take down the banking system, still require people to pay their mortgages, even though there would be no way for them to pay the mortgages, and then they would default, and you could just, this algorithm or whatever institution has set up would just walk right in and say, well, you didn't pay your mortgage. Well, I didn't have. The banking system's been down for 2 months. There's no way to even go to an ATM or even deposit a check. All the bank branches are closed. Well, it's still a functional operating system behind there. You didn't pay your mortgage. Well, we own your house. You get to see how this thing is going to play out so quickly and easily. But again, Ransom, it's like these things have been described through time. I don't care if you go back and India has a very good grasp on millions of years of time. These beings have colors associated with them as well. So where do we come with the jinn? Something etheric, something foggy, something opaque that's cleverly disguising itself out of human perception. And even if you do see it, it's still cloaked in like fog or smoke. I don't know. There's a lot of cycles repeating and a lot of things that we can see moving out. But, the next outage is going to be banks to separate you from everything physical, which dives 100% right back in, Ransom, with your opening comment there. I know I rambled too long, but man, I'll let you jump back in. Now, you open it up big, I'm going to continue big like that. Let's get a little woo-woo.
Well, I've just been looking at the mechanisms that they're using, or at least that they're saying or they're predicting that they're going to be using. And, a big part of it is the legal terminology that they're putting off in all of these governments. So if you look from Europe to Asia, they didn't have to do it in China because the state owns all and decides all there. But in places where there's still small firewalls to complete tyranny, they're trying to change the laws in these places to describe the natural environment as something that it's not. And one of the first ways that they do that is to dehumanize humans. So everywhere you look, they're trying to remove the terms father and mother or parents, from documentation where they just don't use that, where they, or maybe not parent, I'm sorry, but the terms that describe, genial ties and familial ties and things like that. They're trying to remove those. And, one could talk about it for hours, the attack on the nuclear family as far as through media and culture wars. But when you skip past all of that, you have to start thinking eventually, what is the end result if all of these programs continue? And you have to look at it not only on the, socioeconomics or geopolitical phase of it, or just the culture change that may happen, but you have to look at the technology in the background that's powering the ideas. What is the goalpost that they're trying to get to? And when you listen to what they're saying, well, we need to depopulate, and then we need to build a new system that involves really no choice with the human being. And how do we want to get there? Well, we want to make humans and other animals a hackable entity, and we need to get under the skin. I mean, they say all these things, but they're not just saying it. There are patents being made, there are programs being created, and there are technologies available that will match any conspiracy theory you've ever had almost. But so you have to skip past the conspiracy theories and have it more like a thought project. Where does this go? Right. And when you're looking at the integration of biological and technological systems by necessity, just by the programs that they're planning on using, you're looking at a start to finish, completely engineered and blueprinted out biosphere. From the animals that are alive to the plants, and there's no argument that they're well into changing, creating, adapting, or other means of changing the fauna on the environment, and then also the flora. They're attacking all of it. That's the food, that's the entities on the planet. That's the complete circle of what they're doing. And you're not allowed to talk about specific programs, but if you look at it as a wider open idea, you'll see TED Talks about how they can create the things that I was talking about in the first of the show, which are basically biologically grown technological devices that are not implanted in the general sense that you think of, like a doctor or a robot or something, stuck it in your arm. No, you were implanted via the biosphere that you live in, from the food that you eat, from the materials that you wear and your things are made out of. These specific compounds have been saturating the human domain for some time. And, only time that maybe somebody might pay attention to one or the other puzzle piece was when people got sick. So they might start paying attention to that. But what about all the things that doesn't really affect you instantaneously? And you look at what do I need? A little bit of research. All of that ideas, thought process, and setup has already been taking place around the world. Every bit of it, every little idea that you've ever had, from flying, you can look at it in one way, the transhumanist vision of the future, which is smaller amounts of people, nature that's under their control of the new gods, and a population that is completely subservient. But not just that, there's no rebellion in them. There's no individual thought. There's no creation. They can never get out of their caste at that point. So all aspects of, government, like communism, all the way to the technological aspect that they're talking about, which is controlling people from the insides. And don't get it twisted. When you see Elon Musk out there and they're talking about putting a chip in the first human and he's recovered, what they're showing you is like a Etzel. Compared to a 2042, Toyota or something like that. You could pick whichever brand. What they're showing you is so old that this new platform that they're using in real time behind that is already surpassed that. And then you got to think, well, how would they use it in real time? And you look around, well, we've put up, towers. We've put up so many satellites. We have programs of medication. There's additives to the food. And, these aren't just conspiracy theories. The other day, everybody woke up to the fact that all of their cereals, and I'm not going to name the brand names because that might get us in trouble, but certain cereals had certain additives that do a certain thing. And then I take all this together and I'm thinking, if you really wanted to do that full-scale sci-fi, and then mix that with, deductive logic, it seems like this AI pattern, a pattern that's a specific amount of mathematics that would just be like a virtual shape, not unlike sacred geometry in the physical world. We're going to hit that point, and I think that they've already done that. So in order for that to combine with the biological biosphere on there, it would have to be embedded or be one and the same. And then when you start understanding that everything is programmable, all of it, it's all a program. So from your DNA to your RNA. And one good example of how, this is kind of a sidetrack here, but I've been watching this show about a extraterrestrial. I think it's called Resident Alien. Now, within the show, it's pretty cool. The idea, if you like goofy sci-fi, it's kind of a dirty comedy. But within the show, they constantly bombard you with cultural attacks or propaganda for you to think a certain way. But also, the writers are using peer-reviewed scientific papers to push the ideas that are both real and fictional. And the example is this alien is from a line of DNA that shared with another line of DNA here on Earth. And the way that they show that is by giving you a visual of like this asteroid that broke into two pieces and went to two different planets. And then I was thinking, I did a whole show on that exact peer-reviewed paper where it was talking about the addition of RNA and extraterrestrial DNA to the oceans about the exact same time from some kind of bolide event or something like that, right at the same time as the Cambrian explosion. At that time, there were already, the first beginnings of all of the different lines of animals that you think of. But then all of a sudden, there was like a second explosion of DNA in there. And then everything went crazy. And from that line, you get octopus, which is like an alien-like creature that lives on Earth. And while they were, researching the octopus, they find out it has a certain amount of influxes of RNA at different points in its ancestry, all the way back to when we shared a common ancestor, the Luca, the last common ancestor or something like that. And this is a real paper and a real idea that they're, contemplating that could be a reality, that constant bombardment of this planet from outer space, i.e. extraterrestrial life, is constantly raining down on the planet in different forms, viruses, RNA, and even fully formed life forms that if they splash down, dramatically and instantaneously change the ecosystem. So now when you take that same idea and you put it more on a technological based program or platform, you'd realize you'd need all the same components, you'd need the same technology, and I'm talking about the insertion of the different changes to DNA. So if you know how you get sick, whenever we come across a disease, our DNA is permanently changed afterwards. And the same is true from environmental triggers like epigenetics. So whatever you're eating or taking in as a supplement or a medication will completely alter your DNA. That's a fact. So if you're having certain elements and resources that are all you need to make a technological life form or network, all of that is already happening on planet Earth now. It's not fiction, it's happening. And now people are starting to discover it. So the question is how far are we into it, and how far will the collapse happen once all the programs start to meet at the point in which they're supposed to. So all things are pointing to that these crazy people that run the planet know the same things or thought up the same things that I have. The difference being they may want to initiate that program instead of blocking it, because you would think that if this is an inevitable thing, an AI program that will hit a certain shape, and like you said, it would be able to connect to other versions of itself in other places, and possibly with a quantum entanglement at other times. So we're talking about something that is possibly everywhere. And I would think life also. So it seems like an inevitability that these two patterns would cross paths at some point in the evolution of each planet that had life on it. And we're at that spot. The problem is the technocratic elite want it to happen. This is their version, and they've always believed in these ideas. They think they're going to become gods from it. But guess what every god needs, if they're not a real god, is they need somebody to kiss their butt. And that's why they have this idea to bring regular humans along, but they won't be regular. They'll be devolved or specifically grown for a caste. Security, or they might have productive computers, basically, because we have to admit that the only quantum computer that we had or knew about before the technology existed to build an artificial one was humans. And if it's true that humans have something special about them because we originated from biological life, that technological entity would need us to get to the next stage. And what that is, I'm not sure. But just imagine 8 billion or more quantum computers at some point in the future, all completely connected, all completely getting updated at the same time. And this hydrogel platform that they're talking about can literally mimic things that are in your body, where someone could download and upload images. And that's where it gets risky, because if they're at that point to access and utilize that technology, that literally means not because the AI videos that are super, realistic, and not because of the creation of audio that seems realistic and has hidden, things in it. Now they can just program a chemical substance from afar to give you an idea of something that you didn't have before, or steal the ideas that you have first. And we all know that involves outages of food, which will come after outages of technology that is controlled from the top. And it's all ready to come back on whenever they need it. So don't think that because you're having a super outage and the internet's out that it doesn't exist anymore. It's just your access to it is gone. And I guess what our only choice is to somehow find a way to opt out of that. And I really don't know how you could do that if the technology is literally saturating every space in the three-dimensional space we occupy.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, the opting out requires 1% of people to think of new ideas. And then there's 3% of people who would join their idea, the action crowd, and those 3% taking action, then 15% will join them. And that's kind of how it's been through humanity's point to where we've gotten to now. Is it takes that very, very, very small niche of people to come up with new ideas. And we are at that point now where these ideas are going to have to come to a head here, because the taking of everything that is already planned, you might be able to run and hide for a minute. Some are more prepared. And even if you're prepared, and you're out there and you have land like some of us do, and the provisions, and we got wild animal and you can hunt, and we have farm animal, and we got water wells, all these things, even run off from the mountains. And there's going to be water, there's going to be food. And we can stay out there quite a bit longer. There's communities that'll trade things already set up for barter. There's communities that'll trade barter and, traditional money, gold, silver, tools, whatever. That only buys you some time, because as soon as that system goes through the cities, it's definitely coming out to the rural areas. You might be able to hide for a while. You buy some time. I grant you that. But unless the entire system is turned the tables to stop this thing, otherwise we're just all wasting our time. Because that's truly is, how do we turn the tables on this thing that's happening at the moment? This is great taking, like, we're never going to escape it. That's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing you have to get in your head. All of your preparation and all of these things in resilient communities, that means nothing. It is truly all wasted if we do not stop this madness because, oh, wait a second, farm machine going by over here. Outages, as they call it. I'm out in a small farming community in southern Taiwan right now. So it's the middle of the morning here. It's 11:47 a.m. And I'm looking at a full line of dendritic ridges on this mountain that we live near. You can see the full wind-blown pattern from it, from a supersonic wind discharge off a plasma bolt sometime in the past. But even out here, you know, remote Taiwan, remote America, remote Canada, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're buying yourself time, and it is all a moot point and wasted if we do not stop this thing. Because it's like the Terminator. You know, the Terminator movie is a very good equivalent of this system. Not an individual robot, but the system. It will not stop until you are destroyed, period. And even if there's one person living out on 50,000 acres in a little log cabin by themselves, that one person, that system is going to never stop until it even eliminates that person out there. That's why I realize that it's realization that our backs are truly against the wall. And the art of war, if we could reframe it for everybody, that we are pushed into a corner on the side of a cliff with our families, and there's no other place to run. We either fight or we die here. If we could reframe that to the world of that's what this system represents. And those with the understanding the art of war, that is the worst enemy you could possibly choose to go at war with, is somebody who has nothing left to lose, that is fighting for their family, that is backed into a corner, that realizes there is no hope and there is nothing left. So I am going to give it all because there's nothing left to lose. Now, that's the way it needs to be framed, because that's truly the way this monster is gobbling toward us. How do we stop it? It needs to completely stop. This great crisis manufactured from start to finish. But again, you know, the reality is being bent and created. Like you say, 8 billion people thinking the same thing. The news media is feeding this. The news media is feeding that. Oh, it's that enemy over there. Oh, it's that economic, war over there. Oh, it's the devaluation of this, the inflation of that. No, this is all a coordinated plan to move and remove resources from people to create dependency on a new system. And that will only be an intermediary system anyway. Once everything's taken and people are crowded into the 15-minute cities, if that's the way it goes, I'm only saying if it goes that way, that's only an intermediary step in itself anyway. Because like you logically stated, they're going to create lab-grown new individual species that will be completely subservient. Because, you know, looking back in history, I never really understood the power of the kings and the queens and the emperors and the pharaohs and this sort of thing, where those people were 100% compliant to a great extent. But, you know, nature, even if you program it, there's always going to be that 1/10 or 1% or 1/10 of 1% of people that break outside. There's something, even as hard as you try, there's still going to be that sliver of a fraction of a percentage that will somehow just, that nature reverts back to. There's always somebody going to be with that trait that's built in. You can never, CRISPR that out of anybody. It's always going to just turn back on. That's just part of probably the checks and balances of a system that we live in a universe. And nothing goes to 100% one direction. There's always going to be some possibility for equilibrium, no matter how small it starts, like the petri dish with the first cell, and then eventually that petri dish is covered. So it's like crypto also. To relate that to the very same thing is the intermediary step is the 15-minute cities into, they're going to start breeding centers and creating a full species that will comply 100%. But they need you in the interim just for a little bit longer, and then who knows how they would, snuff out the 15-minute cities. But the same with cryptocurrency. This, what you consider blockchain right now, is just the interim step into hash graph. So where, there's a lot of interesting commonalities in the interim steps moving to, hashgraph is what you would envision with the ones and zeros world and a construct around her in a physical reality that smart dust is in the cities and the Internet of Things is running everything. That's what hashgraph is. But on the money movement of side, central bank digital currencies, utility tokens, and everything else in between, and the Internet of Things, so the smart dust also is included in that whole thing, IOTA, for example. So these two worlds definitely start to mix together, and you can start to see that it's very non-physical the way everything is moving into the world. The next outage is going to be the physical world because it needs to move into a completely non-physical realm to be totally dominated. That's the thing. Now, you talk about species. Okay, the octopus, great. I love octopus. I have this relationship with octopus, because when I'm scuba diving or snorkeling, I love to play with those things in the water. Like they can sense if you're there to catch them or not. And if you're not and you're in a playful mood, they generally like stick around and they'll squirt at you and you can chase them down again and they'll, grab you with their tentacles. And, they can read you like a book. But at the same time, when I'm out of the water on land, I love the octopus, especially with wasabi sitting on a plate somewhere in a sushi restaurant. The way that we look at the duality of even the animal species on the planet, was it created? Because Ransom, I do remember just even last show, you were talking about the rewilding of Europe and using past Ice Age Pleistocene animals that they've taken DNA from to then rebirth these Pleistocene animals. Well, at that point, then they're an owned species by a corporation, and there will be a patent with it, where if you find a saber-tooth tiger on your land, you're not allowed to shoot it because it belongs to the corporation. Which takes me back in history again, the compliance of the pharaohs, of the populace, and also if you jump over into China with the dynastic times and the emperors there, it was nearly 100% compliance. If those people jumped to their knees and put their heads down, they did not even want to even see the dust from the feet of the armies marching by out of fear. They wouldn't even see the feet. They were afraid of the dust that the feet kicked up. And that's how, compliant they were of laying, burying the head. Same with Pharaoh. You see it everywhere. But the next chapter into that is, if you're going to reintroduce Pleistocene animals all over the world that belong to a corporation that are patented, it's very much like the king's land. Like you hear all those stories. Well, Robin Hood and whatever. You were sentenced to death because you were hunting and you poached on the king's land, which makes me really wonder with our hidden history, were those animals also, some of them, lab creations of a prior ancient technology time that existed on this planet? So a lot of these species that we see have been tweaked, where when they said that you were hunting on the king's land, it is the king's property, they truly meant in a different way, didn't quite describe it, that was a patented animal that was from the corporation of the time of the king. History is murky at best, and there definitely was some technologically advanced civilizations prior to us. So what were they capable of doing with gene technologies? I don't know, man. I think I've had too much espresso, but I'll keep going with you here, man. Take us out into the break. What do you think about those ideas?
I think that it's kind of naive to think that that's not what's going on, especially when, like I said, you look at the patterns. But I think there's a bunch of key things that have to happen before they get in a position where they can do this plan. And it's obvious plan. And, when you think about if you were going to run everything, you would be okay with the population in these city centers that are away from what you consider your resources, just like you were talking about with Robin Hood, out there in the protected Agenda 2030 human-free zones. Before we get to that point, we have to control birth. We have to control birth, when, where, who, and how. And then they have to start to control information, which we know that process is well, in effect. And then you have to control growth of anything. So growth of financial wealth, growth of information, growth of the literal self of each of these future people that are going to be living into it. Because a lot of people have to understand that if you're alive right now listening to this, these are plans that they have for your children and grandchildren. We are going to get to see them implemented, and we're going to know and understand what they are, but we're not going to have a long enough lifespan to see the end result of it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't act now to stop it.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers set out for a winter hiking and camping trip. Three of the bodies with no eyes was also missing her tongue. The searchers found the abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Syakhl. Mikhail Sharavin, the student who found the tent, said, "The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind." Investigators said the tent had been cut open from inside and that skiers had fled in socks or barefoot. A chain of 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by several people who were wearing socks, a single shoe or barefoot, could be followed and led down towards the edge of nearby woods. At the forest edge, under a large old cedar, the search party found the remains of a fire, along with the first 2 bodies, those of Yuri Krivoshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high. The medical examiner recorded livor mortis on the back, but Krivoshenko was found facing up. This indicated that someone had moved them after their death. On February 27th, between the cedar and the tent, the searchers found Igor Dyatlov and Zenaida Kolmogorova, and 6 days later, on March 5th, Rustem Slobodin. The 3 seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. A medical examination found no injuries which might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. A legal inquest started immediately after finding the first 5 bodies. Searching for the remaining 4 hikers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 5th under 4 meters of snow in a ravine 50 meters farther into the woods from the cedar tree. These 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that those who had died first had apparently relinquished their clothes to the others. Thibaut Brignol was wearing Dubynina's fur coat and hat. Dubynina's was wearing a brown sweater that tested radioactive and was most probably Krivoshenko's. Zolotaryov had Doroshenko's hat, and Kolevatov was wearing Doroshenko's overalls. The waistband of his sweater and lower part of his ski trousers tested radioactive. An examination of the 4 bodies found in May changed the course of the whole investigation. 3 of them had fatal injuries. The body of Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage, and both Dubynina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high. He compared it to the force of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds, as if they were crippled by a high level of pressure. Dubynina was found to be missing her tongue. But things were about to get even more bizarre. Bodies were actually found a few feet from their improvised shelter in the deep part of the ravine. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it is known, remains a contentious and unsolved mystery. Theories ranging from secret weapons, an attack by Yetis, a UFO encounter, and there's even a theory regarding geometry of the mountain combining with wind to produce infrasound in sufficiently high levels to induce panic and hysteria. But what really happened? Seemingly something terrified these skiers so much they fled from their campsite. What it was, no one knows. But something possibly violent happened, some say supernatural or out of this world. The Dyatlov Pass incident is still one of the great mysteries in the histories. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. Call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.
Program here. We're at 30-year highs for percent of disposable income was spent on your food every month. That has risen since 2022-23. It's risen another 5% of your disposable income is now going to food just since 2022-23. So there's a definite disconnect here, and you can really see that at least one of the thumb screws right now is being pushed is food price rises. Because people are being squeezed on the energy, on the rent. Insurance has gone up for everybody. You know, insurance rates for either homeowners insurance or auto insurance are just up. Why is it that insurance company can just raise the rates suddenly? Oh, wait, inflation. Things are costing way more for them. But you're not reflected in that. They can just raise the rates because inflation is going up. But then where's your wages? They're not going up. Oh, wait, it's a perfect world. There is no inflation. The gaslighting continues. It's Revolution Radio. Thank you for letting us speak about such issues. Censorship free here. And for those of you out in the world listening to us, if you enjoy free speech in our conversations, along with the other hosts here at Revolution Radio, consider a donation. Go to Revolution Radio or revolution.radio. And right at the top, you'll see that donate tab. You can hit them up with a check, crypto. Unfortunately, PayPal had clipped the wings on that. So just take a look at the different ways that you can donate to keep the station on air here. Running costs, production cost, upkeep for the website, all these streaming services. And now there's a new service that they've just been integrated with another company that allows to stream this with video and audio across social media platforms. So these are the kind of upgrades that need to be to try to take it to the next level, to share the information, to push back and find at least cracks in the armor here. Maybe that's the whole story of, you know, what seems invincible. There's always some way to penetrate the armor of invincibility, because their plan is from A to B to C to D to E. Now, somewhere between those steps, there's got to be a way that there's some open area that they haven't thought about that can be penetrated by the masses and then disrupt this entire movement of their plans moving into the future. You know, and after watching Giada Griffin's interview with Daniela Camboni on ITM Trading, I was just blown away by not a lot of people are thinking this way. It's all the defensive. Everybody's in the defensive mode. Nobody's thinking offensive mode, which is the way it really needs to be, because almost everybody out there can see the up ramp, the uptick, the huge, gigantic tidal wave that's just rolling through the world, seemingly unstopping, with now the wars everywhere, I'm not even going to call it the military-industrial complex. I'm going to call it the global industrial complex, because it doesn't matter. It's the military, it's the agribiz, it's the aviation industry, it's the shipping industries. It's all of it in unison now as one giant behemoth moving forward to control humanity. So, Ransom, I know you were coming back on to talk about the pieces that, you know, what pieces are going to fall in place, but where's the disruption points that are available for humanity to take control of that? The 15 to 18% of humans who are awake that want to take action to be able to push back against this seemingly taking. Because it's just going to be the awareness. Once people realize they're going to have everything taken, they will finally get it. But right now, so many are asleep and don't understand that perceived property rights are nothing. They're just perceived. And the way that the banking laws have been set up, you're going to have your mortgage bailed into the next banking failure. They're going to swoop into safe deposit boxes. They're going to swoop your checking and savings accounts. But also, they're going to be swooping in on the mortgages. And that's the great taking in a nutshell. So Ransom, second hour, man. Revolution Radio, thanks for letting us be here. The floor is yours again. Take us into the woo-woo.
I don't know how woo-woo it is, the legal debates for kind of the stuff we're talking about is already happening. So I saw a thing about frozen embryos in Alabama. Let's see if I can find that, where the state of Alabama declared them human beings, right? So these are frozen babies that are human beings. Now, I don't have to tell you why that's, important as far as back and forth legal things, but there's going to be a whole new wave of retranslations and redefining what's legal or not legal, and that will be like one of the first things that we're actually seeing that now, where they're trying to change fundamental ideas about culture, about the human experience, the humans living. They want to get it to that feudalist point that you were talking about, where there's really only two groups of people, kind of the group of people that serves the feudalists that, if we're going to use that example, in the castle, they got the baker and the guards and the whatever else they have, all the cobbler and all of these different people that do the work for the city in there, and they live in there, and they spend their whole life in there. But outside the gates are people that didn't want to participate in this new technological system. And like any other, animal that lives on the king's lands, it will be regulated. Or you can phrase it in a new way. So there will be a modern human that accepts the transhumanist agenda. They'll do everything that it takes to be part of it. And, they will help facilitate the idea that we've been talking about, which is kind of far off in the future a little bit, but not too far. And, first they have to start, like I said, with their list of things that they have to control. And we already know that they have control basically on everything now. It's just the transformation of running it and controlling it to having the populace agree and not fight the idea that they're being controlled. And they could do that in two ways. The one that they've been doing it through naivety, basically, and people just not understanding or knowing what kind of technological attacks are hitting them every day. But they can do it in another way, and that's just control the thought process from the beginning. Now, to get to that point, like I said, there's a whole list of things they have to get through, and we're in the middle of that list. So one would be, like I said, you have to control the birth. If you can't control when, where, how, and who has births, including wildlife. So keep this in mind. So in the future, they want to have a control mechanism on the populace that makes them not a wild animal, but a domesticated one. And we all know what happens to the domesticated animal. It gets taken care of. We've been through that. That's basically where we're at in civilization for the masses. They're a domesticated animal now that has to lean on a support system. That support system is controlled from the top. And a lot of, aspects of that have to go into being able to control the masses and who has and when and how many births they have. So they can't start up a birthing facility, like some factory somewhere right now. People would freak out about it, and they have competition still. But if you can continue agendas and programs that limit the number of births, that make it hard to have the expenses it takes to have births, and then also, convince people not to have births, and with all of that, you have that control. And then in the backdrop, the fertility problem, right? We're not going to wonder or fix or, find the cause of it, but we're just going to offer solutions for it. This will become more and more commonplace like it is now. If you live on the East Coast, I'm sure you hear, radio ads and television ads about fertility clinics that will help you and your partner achieve the goal of having a child, because for some reason or another, you just can't get there on your own, whether or not it's age or environmental factors. We're not going to get into why, The fact is we can help you. So that means that only certain people will go to the government facilities or corporate facilities to get help with birth. Now, when that becomes more and more commonplace over, a decade or so, that's all it takes, incrementalized over, people get used to the way things are. And it's not a big deal for them. They'll be like, oh, yeah, I know that 75% of people are infertile. We won't talk about why, even though, like I said, there's been a whole revelation to the public in the mainstream news where they basically admitted that there are supplies of things that change not only your idea of gender, but your fertility that are in the foods. And I don't want to name them just in case mainstream news reverses itself, and then we're censored at that point. But you have to control the birth, but not only the birth. After that, you have to have complete control of the growth, and we're talking about plants, domesticated animals, and domesticated people. So we already know that there's government entities in place to control the growth of agriculture. So that, that takes care of the animals and the plants. And we know some of these biological systems, from injecting medications all the way to cloning and making chimeras, is intertwined with the food industry because of experimentation, etc. And then finally, but not last, you have to control energy in all its forms. And that's the phase we're in right now, where all of these things are being shored up, where the control of them goes to the top. And once they have that, then they use food for the weapon. That's the very last one, the control of food. So when people are worried about energy outages, power outages, because they can't work or whatever they need, most of it's because they've become addicted to certain programs that are available through devices and, the constant interaction with the internet. So people go crazy about that. But that's not all of it. Whenever you have these power interruptions, you also have distribution interruptions, and like I was showing, pharmaceutical interruptions, which means the people that are dependent on the systems available will have trouble with that. All this leads to a population reduction of the older people. So it's only going to take about 10 to 20 years to complete an entire turnover of the population and have complete control on births. Right now, they're taking control of death and property, and you mentioned that. So once they have control of all the property, energy, when and where birth is given, how it grows afterwards, and the information, this is the important part, because this is the part they're shoring up right now too, is the information. They have to control all of it. And one way to do that is if you have the technological expertise to just remove the information from that domesticated population. But then they have a problem. No matter what, at the end of the reset, there's going to be pockets of what will now be considered feral humans. And what do they do with feral animals now? They track them down, and they eliminate them, or they control their numbers, they control their births, and then they give them the same programs that the domesticated version of the animal has. So like if you use cats, for example, there's a bunch of cats out there, they're roaming, they're domesticated, the species is a domesticated cat. However, we call them feral cats because they're not under any kind of control mechanism. So how do cities and areas respond to that? They hunt them down, and they either exterminate them or they neuter, spay them, and mark them, and then track them. So you can imagine what would be happening to the groups of feral humans in the future. They're going to be treated like an invasive species or a feral animal. Well, they'll be tracked down and forced to be they have to either comply and become domesticated, or they will be eradicated, or at the very least, just controlled as far as their birthing abilities and their range, motion, etc., or their freedom. And that's where we're at. And I don't know how any reasonable intellectual person could deny that all of these programs are happening, what do they call it, concurrently right now? They're all happening now. And they kind of lead to this area in which in the future everyone is decimated, everyone is reduced in numbers, reduced in freedom, and the only population that will be left will be begging for control because they need some kind of mechanism. Not everybody. There's plenty of the feral, humans out here that want to be feral and would be okay with being feral, but they're not just going to let you roam around on the king's land without being at the very least tagged. Think about the deer and the wildlife now. What do the governments do? They go track them down. They put a little monitor on them. They'll put bird species or deer. They'll tag their ears. They'll clip their ears. They also do stuff like, the little rings on the birds. They'll keep track of how many predators there are. And these are the same people that are introducing the ideas to rewild the nature areas, right? Because they want to fill it up with animals they choose. And the problem with that, as for a long time, they've been trying to blame the extinction of the Pleistocene animals on human beings. So obviously, if you were trying to bring back a Pleistocene animal ecosystem, there's one element that you would have to eliminate, obviously by necessity, because of all of the years of research that claims that man was the deciding factor in the extinction of those animals, and nothing to do with cosmogenic forces or solar forces or cyclical patterns, possibly. None of that can be known about or taught. So now you're about to see a SS-style destruction of information, and we can see that in full throttle in Europe, but it's also here in the United States. It's only one or two Supreme Court justice rulings in the wrong direction, and what we'll have here is a nation that pays for the program to be built, but is cut out of any benefit that it would give. So right now, from coast to coast, these cities that are failing, that are going bankrupt, that are being destroyed by crime and poverty, are now being influxed with millions and millions of new people. And you might want to ask yourself, is that really to provide 40 million people with a better life and freedom? Or is it to remove the equivalent of a large portion of American cities? Think about the amount of 40 million people are roaming around that have been added to the population up here. And that's just in North America. So you might pay attention to, wow, that's crowded up here, but nobody's paying attention to the fact that those people have now created a vacuum in the areas that left. So you can see all of these different ways where they're trying to destroy the nation state and rewrite the areas of maps, but where did the people really move from? And you got to think about that for a minute. Well, in the case of the Americas, they're moving people out of what they've been calling, the biospheres that we need, and therefore we need to stop production of oil, we need to stop, utilizing wood and other things. And there has to be a happy medium agreed on, the destruction or deforestation of the environment. But at the same time, what they're saying is we're going to move the people out. We're going to stop energy production here and also where they're going. And what does that leave? It leaves an energyless, jobless, financially broke group of nations that have been pushed into and will continue to be pushed into a war scenario with the superpowers of the world until they decide that they're going to go ahead and have some kind of truce, which will be the beginning of that reset in which the nations of the world, will collaborate and agree upon these new technological systems to completely control the human domain in each section of the world. And those sections of the world that you might live in, if you live in flyover country or anywhere out in rural areas or in nature anywhere, you will be removed. And if you think about how they've been running nature preserves and national monuments and things, they've already got a hold on this idea. So it's not going to be much to transform the institutions that regulate and control those areas now into the institutions that remove the feral human element out of those areas.
Yeah, I'm looking at it as Where do the people come from? Well, if we're hearing a lot about the Atlantic millennial overturning circulation, the AMOC, it's the meridional overturning circulation. This on a multi-thousand-year cycle. The AMOC thing's making the news everywhere. They're suddenly telling you that's going to be a year, or there's going to be a instant cooling event, almost like the day after tomorrow. Now, with the grand solar minimum forecast by every space agency across the world now in earnest, saying as soon as we drop off of this solar maximum into the solar minimum, once we hit this solar minimum coming up, and just really a couple of years from now, we're going to enter a period of low sunspot activity for 20 years or so, equal with something that occurred in the 1600s, the Maunder minimum. But during that time, there was an enormous amount of agriculture disrupted, anything 45 degrees north and above. And those who were living in those areas in more northerly latitudes struggled or moved. And the world lost 25% of the population at that time. So you ask where these people come from. Well, they're coming from Central America, Amazonia, southern Mexico, areas that are going to be just fine during a grand solar minimum, or even like a super grand solar minimum, something heavier on a 2,000-year cooling period. These areas would still be just fine for growing food and having access. Now, what did they leave? Well, they left the same infrastructure that's in place in most places. You got roads that go out into agricultural lands. And a lot of the people who abandoned that were farmers themselves, looking for a better life. So now we have all this ag land that just suddenly got abandoned. It wouldn't take very long to just go in and refurbish all that during a dire situation where if we were losing crop production 45 north and 45 south, above and below to the Antarctica or up to the Arctic, depending on which hemisphere. You need to find a new growing area, a new grow zone for a better term, to grow food, to still maintain a population. I'm not saying the same amount of people, but a population on the planet. Well, if you can't grow it, you literally can't grow it because nature says, it's too cold here, I'm not going to, the plants aren't going to grow there. It's going to be difficult to put greenhouses, especially with these winds picking up in the atmosphere. Like there's a huge uptick in wind speeds around the world at the moment, if you haven't noticed. But where's another area that a lot of people are migrating from? Africa, the Sahel, and Northern Africa. Like those were areas that were slated to become new grow zones anyway, to push the new fourth turning into Northern Africa and the Sahel and set up a single grow zone for the entire planet in one location, controlled by just a few corporations. That would replace all the lost production. Because you got to realize that when we head into this 20-year period, that's almost a full generation that's going to experience this, very low food productivity or food output from our world. Like it's going to have tremendous ripple effects in the beginning like it is now. Why do you think your food prices keep going up and up and up and you can't just explain why? It's because they're starting to lose a lot of crops where they can't continuously grow it, and it's enough to the point where it's noticeable now. The crop losses, the numbers aren't coming in. You got Ukraine, which is a major exporter now. They're not going to really grow this year. I mean, you can't with a straight face even tell me that they're going to come close. Originally, they would grow 30 million tons, approximately, just the average, and they would export 20 million of that to the rest of the world. Usually lower economies that didn't require the super high standards that would, others would take on for commodities trades to get a higher, wheat price, excellent, very good, whatever. Moisture content, this sort of thing. So 20 million tons is off the market pretty much. That would have been export. And then the 10 million tons that's consumed within the Ukraine. So just that thing alone took off 30 million tons. And you might say, okay, well, but you got to realize in the scheme of things, there's only 700 million tons across the entire planet that were grown. I'm going to say it's dropped since then to sub 700. And now we're taking 30 off. So you're looking at a 5% reduction just on what's been lost across the planet. From it used to be like 730 million, then it dropped to below 700, like 698 million tons. Just from this shift I'm talking about, took that much off. And then we got 5 million off, another 5% off of Ukraine. So you start to look over there and go, whoa, there's a lot of crop losses. And then we got these record runaway food pricing indices happening at the moment. So just in today's video, like I said before the show here, I was talking about record Robusta prices. record olive oil prices, record cocoa prices. Now you might go, well, dude, I don't eat chocolate. Well, yeah, you know what? It means that the whole entire hydrological cycle across what you consider these warmer areas of the world where they grow the coffee, the tea, well, and that some higher elevations require cooler, but also the olives and the cocoa. Like it's showing you very cleanly that there's a very big disruption in these equatorial latitudes further into the, mid 20 latitudes, that something drastically has changed to the point where it's denting and actually smashing production of these crops. So that's a canary right there in the huge coal mine if you're looking at food pricing. So how do we work around this? Well, the plan is for at least this crew of World Economic Forum characters is to stop agriculture across most parts of the world and set it up into a single area that can be controlled. That way, we don't have to worry about deforestation because they're reforesting the desert. They're putting agricultural areas out in the desert. And they're talking about 30 million hectares of land between the Middle East and all of North Africa and all of the Sahel. It is actually much larger than the United States and Canada combined as a single growing area. And it's a double rotation crop. So their whole, now if you watch me out with this, this is another way, maybe you'll find a possible, opening in the armor here. The reason everybody's talking about stopping agriculture, like Kerry was saying, we got to stop agriculture or else people are going to starve. Well, the statement that he was giving was talking about the grander plan of it to stop most agribiz across the world and concentrate it in a single spot, but then restart the global debt system by pushing all of this investment and everything into North Africa and the Sahel and the wider Middle East, because a lot of these areas used to be the frankincense root. In this area, what you know now is Yemen is one of the key points for water across that Horn of Africa, along with Oman. And once you start thinking about that empty quarter in Saudi Arabia could be farmed again with below water resources and all the hydrological changes, well, you're starting to talk about, millions and millions and millions of extra acres just brought on out of nowhere. But it requires the investment. And it seems our world has run to the end of the debt issuance system, which has to be restarted somewhere. The collapse is going to be great for the banks because they're going to swoop everything. But then they're going to have all this capital and be cash rich and flush with everybody's assets. Like, where are they going to deploy those again after this next fork turning? Well, they're just going to throw it all out into Africa. And you saw Coinbase, speaking of cryptocurrencies, is now issuing a stable coin in 10 countries across the Sahel and focusing on Africa with something called the yellow card. A little bit kind of rude to do that because, they have yellow fever in that thing, but the yellow card is what you need to take for your vaccination card when you have the yellow fever vaccination to show that you've gotten that so you could cross borders. But they call it the yellow card. Now, currently, there's 10 nations that are involved with it. It is a cryptocurrency where $1 equals $1. Or it's like a stable $1 coin, equivalent of today's, you understand it as a dollar. Now, if the dollar disappears, it'll be equal to something else, where 1 equals 1. So if you're a foreign worker from Mali, or if you're a foreign worker from Central African Republic, or a foreign worker from Eritrea, that 1 equals 1. So when you go home, you're able to spend the equivalent of $1 in your country at that rate. See, the thing is, if you're from Mali and you're working down there, and then let's say you're from Eritrea and you take your Mali's money back to Eritrea and you try to convert it, a lot of these banks don't want to touch that stuff. So you're going to lose like 25% on the conversion rate or more just because people don't want to deal with those types of currencies. And then, maybe there's a devaluation as you're going home too, then the currency devalues, and then you get hit with an extremely high currency swap rate on that. So Coinbase is in there, and I talked about this a couple of years ago, saying that you knew they were going to really start the earnest in setup when they got the one stable coin for all of Africa to pay all the workers that would come there, so they could be guaranteed their wages and then return back to their families in remittances. That 1 could equal 1, so the entire world can come and take place and take part now. Anybody from any country can go there and get paid, and they'll be paid with the same stable coin of 1 equals 1. So if you return back to America, that dollar is still $1. You go back to South Africa, that dollar is still worth $1, and you can convert it to your rand. You're taking the dollar equivalent with you back and then converting to the currency. It's not these crazy, different off currencies that only trade in a certain market with like 3 banks or something. This was the plan anyway. So now you start to look at how are some of these things starting to be implemented here, where Germany right now has just implemented a new meat tax. This is what I mean. Like, they're demonizing meat, they're demonizing all kind of foods. And the eventual plan is to stop all agriculture, all animal husbandry, and then move it into a centralized location controlled, again, by how many companies would control that grow zone for distribution across the world of the foods. Then you're reliant on another continent half a world away to deliver your food every day. Like, what could go wrong with the transportation system there? I wonder. But the world's growing resource areas are going to be consolidated into, that's why you're seeing all these maps. They want to move everybody out of and get them out of the wilds. They want to get you into the cities. And then they're going to set up, once that's complete, that's part 1 of the project. Once that's complete, and this will happen within your lifetime, this 20-year period into the grand solar minimum here, they want to consolidate everything into these localized regions as 45 north and above go offline and 45 south go offline. We're talking parts of Australia, parts of South America, parts of South Africa, all going offline, which takes a huge, huge, huge amount of crops off the market. So what are they going to do? They're going to set up in these warmer grow belt areas that are uninhabited right now or sparsely habited, or wait a minute, scratch my head, people have left in mass out of them. Yeah, those same areas are slated for all the new investment in the world for the new fourth turning to start again. But they got to demonize all food first. And again, back to the story here I was working on. I'm sorry, Ransom, talking a little long here, but Germany has introduced a new value-added tax on meat. Now, it used to be 7%, but they've just raised that up to 19%. Originally, it was said, it's only going to cost you a couple of cents, and people were like, hey, that's a good idea, because they're trying to protect animal welfare. So a lot of these animals raised on farms, they wanted to guarantee that they had good animal welfare with it, and it's called the animal welfare tax. Things are going to get only a few cents more expensive, was the original. I'm quoting it here from 2019. Meat-based products, etc. They need to put in an animal friendliness act into animal care. And it's only going to be a few cents more expensive. But then the real numbers come out. They're going to move it from 7% to 19%. So let's say your thing costs $10, and before it was 70 cents, and now it's $1.90. I don't think that's a few cents. I think that's dollars, not cents. So again, everybody got hoodwinked into this thing. They sold it one way, but then they delivered it in a different way. So everywhere you look, food prices are up and up. And it's going to continue that way. And mark my words, the Sahel in North Africa is going to become one of the most important agricultural and economic areas on our planet within this next 20 years. Guaranteed, because they've already given you the plan. Like, there's a couple people out there that are, should always continuously talking about what these globalists have planned. And a lot of people ask them, like, how did you know this? And they're like, well, we didn't. All we did was read the documents of what they were planning. And we're just telling you, we're reading the documents because you're too lazy to do it. But we're reading the documents, and we're just telling you what the documents said on what their plans are. Here's plan, step A, step B, step C. I'm saying the same thing because I've read a lot of their documents on what they want to do with the food production of the world. Here's their first step. Here's the second step, plan C, step B, step D, E, F, G, H. You can already see so cleanly, but it all ends up in these areas that are being migrated away from right now. Magic, how it all works. It's all intertwined, Ransom. It's all intertwined. And you see it as well as I do, man. It's clear as day.
I was also wondering, because, when you think about what they're doing with the migration of people, you would have to come to the conclusion that they want the equatorial belts, right? And that they want to cut off energy and different things. And this might be how it plays out. You would have to push not only north, but south, and they don't prefer south. And what I mean by south is you would have to have migrations coming into Australia, South Africa, and the southern part of South America. And you would have to create instances where people would have to flee those other regions. So like Northern Africa. You would have to get people out of northern South America and southern North America to push them back up into the other areas. And with that, you bring populations that haven't been living with other populations, which increases the chances for the spread of new viruses to new people, vice versa from both ways, which would, cause a need for those communities to feel like they needed health care. And that would be easier to get them all registered in at a certain time. So not only are you moving the population, but you're convincing a population that might have not been trackable and might not have been convinced to be tracked or participate in any kind of digital system in the area that they lived in. However, if they're enticed with free food, monthly money, housing allowance, and free medical care, they might choose to opt in to a system that catalogs them, the numbers, their, where they came from, everything about them. So in other words, collect biometrics from, say, just in our country, 40 million extra people that we wouldn't have had biometrics on. And then, you would have to have reasons, like I said, in those center areas, maybe the Middle East, Northern Africa, Southern Asia, let's see here, Southern North America, and Northern South America there. And you'd have to move the people out. So once they're pushed into these areas, these big cities that they would necessarily live in, they would have to opt in to get this free health care. Now, if that same population started eating food that wasn't nutritious, that's made by mega corporations, well, obviously their health would decrease from the areas where they were living, where they were eating a more natural diet, and their diet would now change. And we know that when diets change, the effects can be seen within decades, which would reduce the health of more and more people who would need more and more medical intervention. Now, when you look on the news right now, there's a great excuse out there to get rid of all of the other systems that are involved, like Medicare and Medicaid and, insurance programs. You were mentioning that before, like health insurance programs, and basically consolidate it all into one to protect you, the consumer, the patient, against cyber attacks where people might, get in there and mess up your information where you just couldn't take part in some of these things. So you would opt into this new system for protection, of course, and availability. But once they have everybody in that system, and you can see this was going on today, change in healthcare, pharmacies nationwide report outages in wake of cyber attacks. Let me show you another one right here. Pharmacies across America are having trouble processing some prescriptions because of the cyber attack. United Health blamed a nation-state threat for the hack that disrupted pharmacy orders. And then, it goes on and on. But guess what? There's another option, David. There's another option. And speaking of another sci-fi show I watched, it was called 57 Seconds with Morgan Freeman. In that movie, they had a electronic band that you would wear across your wrist, that's been proposed by people like Homeland Security and others. Or you could think of like the, the Fitbit or something, I forget. And there's some other medical watches and bands that people wear that monitor them. But you could skip past, just that. But the reason I bring that movie up is because in the movie, there's a major conflict between the pharmaceutical giants and the technocratic giants on who can treat the masses, but not just treat them, control them. So like, if you could wear a band that could make it where you don't get sick, but also, guess what? You just wake up in the morning and without any outside influence, you want to exercise for 30 minutes and you want to eat the preferred foods that band tells you want. So, that was just a side note in the movie and had nothing to do with the main plot. So I didn't even ruin the movie, but they threw that in there that idea that a technology could replace pharmaceutical. Now, when you look into this topic, you'll find out that, yes, indeed, this is a big industry. They're trying to find ways in which they can manipulate the body to produce compounds and different things so that you wouldn't need to take things from an outside source or, eat pills or get shots. And then you look and then you think back, hey, wait a minute. They're already talking about outages of pharmaceuticals. And in the last year, I've read several articles that talked about they were worried about this exact thing happening that happened today, about in the future, you might have problems getting pharmaceuticals because of either supply chain demand problems with, whatever causes those. And, we ad nauseum go over those reasons, but also that there might be a cyber attack that would destroy the independent systems that run. So, of course, you would need a main system to get in. And once you've got in that system, now you're not going to be able to buy food. And we're talking about that fictional band on the movie, but in real life, they want a digital ID central banking system that controls your money, that you need to buy the pharmaceuticals, that you need to pay for travel, that you need to pay for your bills, that you need to get the prescription medications that you need. Now, once this generation's done, that system is already implemented for the new birth arrivals, right? So they'll be implemented and enrolled in those programs from birth all the way through, which leaves the question about those other areas. Is seemingly they're moving people out of those areas. And then here's this last idea, because of all the other programs and reasons that they want to turn off the power, turn off the gas, turn off the electricity to save the planet, right? We need to save the planet. To do that, you got to eat less meat. You got to turn off the power. You got to cut your consumption. You got to cut your carbon footprint, all of those things. And then you see headlines like this. Here's how scientists reach nuclear fusion ignition for the first time. That came out, right? But here's this one. The Smithsonian lights out inspires visitors to save the fading night sky. Now, how do you do that? Well, you have to turn off all the lights. You got to turn off all the electricity in your super city that creates light pollution that blocks out the sky, right? So in order to see the sky and save the planet and save the beauty of the planet, well, you're going to have to reduce people and reduce consumption. And then, finally, we just turning off the power to save the beauty of the planet. Not just save the planet, but how about we just turn off the lights in your super city so you can see the sky? Now, those are a lot of excuses, but what you're talking about is a reality where all the humans that don't have mega wealth are shoved into cities. They're reduced in power. They eat food that's food-like stuff, and they're given medicine. And this entire thing is set up on a system of biometrics that can't be beat, a complete surveillance system, and a monetary system that's based on your behavior and whether or not you participate. And if you don't have those, you'll be someone on the outside of the city that's in an unauthorized area. So you'll be hunted down like an invasive species. And I think that includes, and think about what they're doing. You have all these billionaires buying up places like in New Zealand and Hawaii and different places that are secluded and have a long geologic history of at least sustainability for, being there. So they know they're there for a long time. And you wouldn't believe probably what's underneath the Rocky Mountains and in the limestone caves of the central United States. And, speaking of that, one thing that's always convinced me that they are going to do some kind of massive emergency, or they're expecting some kind of natural emergency that's going to be so cataclysmic that they prepared some kind of bunker under Andrews Air Force Base, which is the presidential Air Force Base, something so big that they had a pile of dirt that was bigger than the Pyramid of Giza. And when you would drive by it, you'd see these teeny tiny dump trucks driving up to the top to dump more dirt on this big pile. And when you're living there, this dirt is coming from somewhere, right? So it's coming from underground. And if you know how big those dump trucks really are, they're massive. I saw a group of big wide load semis taking just the dump down the road, and it took all 4 lanes, and they had to stop traffic to just move them through there. So that gives you an idea of the size of the dump truck that looked like an ant on top of this hill. And that's not the only place that's doing that. So why are the elite building armored redoubts, building doomsday bunkers? They're building seed vaults and genetic they cataloged all the genes, they're gene vaults, I guess you could say. And they have all of the genetic material necessary to start from scratch on the other end of some kind of large cataclysm. Now, is that going to be man-made? A short nuclear exchange? Are they going to just wait for the population to reduce from all of the programs that are designed to do that? Or is there going to be some kind of cosmic event or solar event that they're planning on or calculating that will give them a hand up in restarting after this great reset that we're living through?
I think they're going to try to keep the resources. Now, here's the thing. How does that all dovetail into, we know something big is coming. We know that the banking system needs to be destroyed before it can come out of the ashes and turn back into the phoenix and be reborn as something different. But people are always looking for the timelines, and I have been too. And luckily, there's 2 interviews you probably want to listen to. The latest Bill Holter interview with, what's that over there? Bill Holter and USAWatchdog.com, Greg. That was one of the best interviews I'd seen about timelines and, the defaults on the U.S. bonds. And then Jim Willey, also, any interview you listen to of his, also talks about we're at the very end of the rope where our U.S. ports are nearly empty, where nobody wants to take treasury bills as payment anymore at delivery, where now they're swapping out super tankers of oil. So what you'll notice is a swap between cargo vessels, and then you'll start to see oil tankers laying offshore everywhere, because that's what they want is, we'll send the goods in, but we don't want your dollars. We'll take that oil and you deliver it where we want it to go. This seems to be a new thing overlaying right now. And the reason I try to preface this, Berkshire Hathaway is unloading an enormous amount of shares. I mean, an enormous. It's the biggest sell that they've done since Berkshire Hathaway has been in existence. They're moving into cash. I'd have to get that slide for you. It's buried in another file, but the one I pulled up this morning, which I think I sent you there, Ransom, was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust share sales. They have to fill a form out when they want to sell stocks. So here's what they are unloading as we speak. 100% of all these are going away out of their portfolio. 100% of these are being sold right now. Apple, the iShares, ETF, IYW, Meta, Adobe, Applied Materials, Amgen, Amazon, Broadcom, Booking Hotels, Chubb, Cisco, CVS, Chevron, Eaton, Alphabet, Goldman Sachs, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan, Lockheed, Morgan Stanley, NVIDIA, Oracle, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, Schlumberger, TJX. We got Thermo Fisher. Who else is down there? Train Technologies, Unilever, United Health Group, Visa, Technology Select, ExxonMobil, American Tower Corporation, Walt Disney, Eastern Chemical, Alphabet, Home Depot, Lowe's, Merck, PepsiCo, RTX, and Target, and Consumer Staples, SPDR, are all 100% sell orders. And we are talking hundreds of thousands of shares, 100% sell. So what do they know that we don't? That they're exiting everything. And Berkshire Hathaway is exiting everything into cash also right now. These are the 2 biggest players. You look at this, and this information is generally not too publicly available, and it just comes across a few websites that I happen to monitor. I never would have found this on my own, ever. But the amount of sell orders even just Apple, they're selling 52,000 shares, 100%. And you look at that, what's the price of Apple today? I don't know, $700. It used to be $1,000, whatever it is. And Meta, at 27,000 shares, and all these bigger ones, Amazon, they're selling 44,000 shares. Cisco Systems, 62,000 out the door. Alphabet, 38,000. And then we got JP Morgan, 30,000. And these are the types of numbers here. Pfizer, they're selling 68,000 shares. Who's that? Poot Group, 53,000 shares. And you look at Unilever, 72,000 shares out the door. They're going 100% into cash for some reason right now. Now, this is a big move. So when you talk about the big pile of dirt, I see a big pile of moves here. The only thing they're keeping is the Microsoft, obviously, because he has the ownership shares of that. And they're keeping their Berkshire Hathaway shares, but they reduced 11.8%. So all they own, get this, John Deere is another one they kept. There's only 3 out of their entire portfolio, 3 companies that they kept. Microsoft, obviously, because there's some interconnection there with Gates himself. But the only 2 that are outside that realm that he kept were Berkshire Hathaway and John Deere. Everything else went. So what is that flagging and telling us there, Ransom? What do you think? Like, why are they fire sailing along with Berkshire Hathaway is also on a fire sale for everything into cash? Something's going on here where they're broadcasting moves. And Bill Holter, that interview was showing that an enormous amount seems to be piling up in here into June and July for civil unrest. Oh, yeah. And then Martin Armstrong, with his newest interview, also Socrates, their software is pointing to a huge amount of change. A possible head fake downturn in June and July, but then a massive cataclysm of 30% reduction in the stock markets here coming up at the end of the year, along with civil unrest and thing. So it does seem to all be piling in on this year, and it seems like a few people are ahead of the game here getting rid of that. So what are they going to do with all those hundreds of billions of dollars? Hundreds of billions, nearly $1 trillion of stock. Like, what are they going to do with all that money in cash? Now, where do they put that? That's my question. Are they going to buy gold? Are they looking for land? Are they doing more underground bunkers? Are they part of that city building? I mean, are they part of the Bitcoin citadel? I mean, what's happening? Are they buying crypto with all that money? What is going on? Where would you put that money, Ransom, do you think?
I think they're all setting up their legacies. They all want to have legacy. They are all in agreement. And think about this for a minute. If you had all of these tech companies that are inventing technologies, and we all know by the time it gets anywhere and it's any good, it'll end up in the hands of DARPA, which means there's a threshold in which tech companies cannot pass. They're not going to get past that certain point. But if you played the game, you might be told that you'll be allowed to be in business for so long. And then during that time, you can accumulate enough wealth so that you could stockpile enough gold and enough resources and a bunker and this and that. And you can be one of the team players on the other side. And think about what you were saying there with those things. That sounded like, in my opinion, and I'm not like an economics guy or nothing, but I was listening to that. John Deere is heavily into AI and AI-controlled farming equipment. So that might be why the stock would have stayed there. But as far as those other companies, it sounds like they might be anticipating more bank failures but not only a tech bubble pop. Meaning that all of these companies that have been surviving on useless junk for some time, the television market, the phone market, the electronics market for doodads and gizmos that don't really improve your life is saturated. Obviously, that has to come to an end at some point, right? And they have to make way for the new technologies and the new systems. So you would see a bunch of tech companies or different things like that kind of being left to crumble and fall apart after the CEOs and the major stockholders got their worth out of it and moved it. And where would you move it? Well, if you were smart, I don't know, right now you might be doing exactly what the elites are doing and putting their money into these biotech firms, putting your money into these military industrial complex companies that are going to rake in record profits until the system collapses. So what happens if you're a black budget government, a breakaway government, and you've been receiving billions and billions or trillions and trillions of unmarked, untraceable tax resources for decades? I think you'd be all right in a collapse, right? Even though the public government or the constitutional republic system and framework would collapse, but not that backup black budget government, not the ones that have controls and strings on all of the technologies, the people that control the regulators. And if you think about it, who comes out with all of the first tech first? It's always a DARPA related company, always. That's because there's a group above that that controls that technology that was set up decades and decades ago, probably about 1947. And that kind of alludes to the point that the general public is unaware of the technological level of the people that actually control things. And they are at a point where they can unplug any monetary system and be untouched by it because they have real physical assets. And you wonder why, like, these NGOs, governments, and, like people, the groups like the European Union are selling and giving away people's, lands like they did in Greek. It's because they're plotting out a whole new world that we're not part of.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers set out for a winter hiking and camping trip through Russia's Ural Mountains. One of their group had turned back after several days for medical reasons, but the other 9 continued along with their trip. The 9 hikers' bodies were later found mutilated in complete disarray, radioactive and dead. Most were students or graduates of Ural Polytechnical Institute. The goal of the 14-day expedition was to reach Otorten, a mountain 12 miles north of the site of the incident. This route at that season was estimated as Category 3, the most difficult. All members were experienced in long ski tours and mountain expeditions. However, when the bodies were found, 5 students appeared to have died from hypothermia. The remaining 4 hikers had even more inexplicable injuries. One had a fractured skull, another had a twisted neck. 2 were missing their eyes, and one of the bodies with no eyes was also missing her tongue. The searchers found the abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Shakal. Mikhail Sharavin, the student who found the tent, said, "The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind." Investigators said the tent had been cut open from inside and that skiers had fled in socks or barefoot. A chain of 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by several people who were wearing socks, a single shoe or barefoot, could be followed and led down towards the edge of nearby woods. At the forest edge, under a large old cedar, the search party found the remains of a fire, along with the first 2 bodies, those of Yuri Krivoshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high. The medical examiner recorded livor mortis on the back, but Krivoshenko was found facing up. This indicated that someone had moved them after their death. On February 27th, between the cedar and the tent, the searchers found Igor Dyatlov and Zenaida Kolmogorova, and 6 days later, on March 5th, Rustem Slobodin. The 3 seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. A medical examination found no injuries which might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. A legal inquest started immediately after finding the first 5 bodies. Searching for the remaining 4 hikers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 5th under 4 meters of snow in a ravine 50 meters farther into the woods from the cedar tree. These 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that those who had died first had apparently relinquished their clothes to the others. Thibaut Brignol was wearing Dubinina's fur coat and hat. Dubinina's was wearing a brown sweater that tested radioactive and was most probably Krivoshenko's. Zolotaryov had Doroshenko's hat, and Kolevatov was wearing Doroshenko's overalls. The waistband of his sweater and lower part of his ski trousers tested radioactive. An examination of the 4 bodies found in May changed the course of the whole investigation. 3 of them had fatal injuries. The body of Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage, and both Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high. He compared it to the force of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds, as if they were crippled by a high level of pressure. Dubinina was found to be missing her tongue. But things were about to get even more bizarre. Bodies were actually found a few feet from their improvised shelter in the deep part of the ravine. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it is known, remains a contentious and unsolved mystery. Theories ranging from secret weapons, an attack by Yetis, a UFO encounter, and there's even a theory regarding geometry of the mountain combining with wind to produce infrasound in sufficiently high levels to induce panic and hysteria. But what really happened? Seemingly something terrified these skiers so much they fled from their campsite. What it was, no one knows. But something possibly violent happened, some say supernatural or out of this world. The Dyatlov Pass incident is still one of the great mysteries in the histories. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28+ years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. Call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.